Welcome back to a new episode of Read More Comics, M-O-O-R-E, where Tom and I are revisiting, rereading the Alan Moore bibliography of comics. We've got 35, 40 years worth of comics that we can pull from. We've been hitting some heavy hitters lately. Let's continue that trend right now, man, with the first issue of the V for Vendetta miniseries. My name's Ed Piskor.
I'm Tom Scholey.
V for Vendetta was serialized in Warrior magazine in the same way that Miracle Man, Marvel Man was, in the same issues even. Small chapters.
Add them all up, you might get like 20 pages of Alan Moore, in an issue.
If you get a hold of Warrior magazine, there is Alan Moore influence all throughout, because there are small stories of Laser, Eraser, and Axel Press Button, and those are characters that he created, even though the strips are drawn by Steve Dillon and written by Steve Moore, I believe. Those are characters he created. And then in some of the later issues, there are standalone stories of Big Ben.
Who, really? The Man with No Time for Crime.
Exactly, with that same subtitle.
It's funny that you say that, because somebody had told me a bunch of years ago that there's like stories of like the V for Vendetta, like V, where it's like, Evie takes over as V and then has like an adventure, or somebody told me about, like, but I haven't seen any of this, so I'm thinking, like, is that just some urban legend kind of thing?
Well, I passed on those Warrior magazines to you. You could check stuff out yourself, man. I could tell you that there are Alan Moore Miracle Man, Marvel Man stories that were not reprinted in Eclipse Comics, because there are a few drawn by Steve Dillon. But let's stick to the task at hand. Yeah. We have V for Vendetta here, serialized in Warrior magazine. Smaller page count for each of the chapters. These are about 6-page, at most like 7-page chapters. And thinking about this story in relation to Miracle Man, which is another set of episodes that we're doing ourselves. Before we jump in, the artist.
Yeah.
Don't want to forget the artist.
Of course.
David Lloyd. Yet again, another guy that did some work with Moore on Tharg's Future Shocks in the pages of 2000 AD. So he has some rapport. He has some relationship with this guy. In like a 2 or 3 sentence way, can you describe David Lloyd's art?
High contrast.
Strong black and whites. Noir.
Yeah, noir. Yeah.
Just future noir. It's like future noir, like a Blade Runner without the cyberpunk element or something.
Yeah, without as much like tech. Alan Moore kind of asked David Lloyd, like, what kind of comic would you, like, let's do a comic together. What kind of thing would you like to do? And David Lloyd was like, well, I like the TV show The Prisoner. Like, he named a couple things. And so right off the bat, it's like, this feels like The Prisoner. Yeah,
and once we get to chapter 2 of this first issue, that'll be abundantly clear. One of the things that really astounded me, now I have a slight confession to make. I never read the complete V for Vendetta. There is a part of this story that like ends and I like it, and then the very next moment, the very next chapter or whatever, pushes me away. Yeah. So that's going to be fun, because this is going to be my first real full reading of V for Vendetta. So I hope, like, it's been a while since I tried. Obviously I'll do it. I'm going to read it all now, but I'm going to see, like, maybe I just was a little too immature at the time, or I don't know. That's going to be fun, but it doesn't come for a while, where I kind of jack out of the matrix. Yeah. Within the first 7-page chapter, Alan Moore creates the world. Yeah. We know where we are. We know what's at stake, and we know the ecosystem. Yeah. We have a good enough knowledge of the characters. You can almost tell an infinite amount of story.
Yeah, he creates like an environment. It's the surveillance state, and there's just all these little. It's like we have super precise weather prediction. Where like what's going to happen like minute by minute. It's 1984. It's like the novel 1984. There's cameras everywhere, and again, like so many of these things are just commonplace now.
Like he talks about like when he put those CCTV closed circuit televisions like in like page 1 of V for Vendetta. He felt like perhaps he was pushing the bounds of people's suspension of disbelief by like having that solitary like CCTV camera there. And now like whenever there's any inkling that a CCTV camera in Britain helped thwart anything, find out like a missing child, like or any like slight little thing that it does, they trumpet that as
Yeah,
like
yeah,
being
they
like
press
it's like
release it.
yeah, it's,
Yeah, I mean, in this, maybe I'll read it later, but in this version of it, there's like a little intro by
Yes.
Alan Moore where he talks about, like, and it's chilling to read, and it's an intro he wrote like in the '80s, and he was saying like, I thought that it would take, a nuclear, nuclear winter or whatever to nudge England into, like fascism, and I didn't realize just how easy. And so he's describing the Thatcher years, but it's really chilling.
yeah, yeah, and he's like, like maybe I'll take my kids, we'll move to the country because I don't like England anymore. There's a very reliable, like the voice of fate
Yeah.
is a bit of a MacGuffin for this first issue.
Yeah.
And the voice of fate is very reliable. Some people, because they make efforts to keep people reasonably ignorant, forget all about like the pop culture of the past, all that sort of thing. Fate reliably, every hour on the hour, pops on the telly, pops on the radio, and gives you the accurate weather predictions, lets you know not to go in this part of town or that part of town. This area is being quarantined. Everything is controlled and regulated, but that voice of fate is to make you feel like utopian.
Yeah, there's like an order to the universe, but it's like a state run order.
Very quickly, we discover the truth behind the matter that, yeah, everything might not be rosy because we have our female protagonist, Evie.
Evie, yeah.
Yeah, we have Evie, and she's in a little hovel, getting gussied up for the evening. She has to become a prostitute. She's a 16-year-old, and in order to like make ends meet, feed her brother or whatever, she's gonna have to bring in extra income, and this is the best way she can think of how to accomplish this. I am not a fan of the color in this book.
Yeah.
The color, like on a panel per panel basis, is just fine, whatever. But as a storytelling element, it's not very good in a lot of places. And very early on here are a few of those places because there was a lot of opportunity to do things with color to like help sell the story.
Sure, yeah.
And the transition sequences between Evie getting ready for the night and V getting ready for the night, if you aren't vigilant, you can just think it's the same
Same person?
situation.
Yeah, okay.
It's possible. Like
Right.
I thought that
Sure.
when I was younger, and upon my first rereading, I thought that maybe she's just sitting there in a different part of her makeup room that has posters of James Cagney movies.
Yeah.
You could have easily have taken care of that with color.
Like the V stands for a lot of things, and that's like a thing through this. It's like, what's the V stand for? And it's like villain. And I think he refers to himself as the villain or whatever. And it's like
That's the name of this chapter.
Yeah,
too.
this is the chapter, the villain, and he's in like a Guy Fawkes costume. Now this is like maybe the most English of Alan Moore's comics. It's like all these, like, so Guy Fawkes. It's like this. You'd probably be very familiar with Guy Fawkes if you grew up in England, but not so much here. But he was like a revolutionary Catholic in sort of Protestant England, and he was part of a plot. Like he blew up, or was part of a plot to blow up British Parliament or whatever, and then was captured and like murdered or what, and they like reenact, like Guy Fawkes Day is the holiday where they reenact the capture and execution of Guy Fawkes.
The 5th of November.
The 5th of November, another V, the 5. And so he's embracing that role. He's like, I'll be the villain. And sort of in this surveillance state, in this sort of like toxic state, the superhero would have to be a villain.
They're in charge, which means they're also in charge of the media. And if you show up, man, they have no choice but to make you the villain. She goes on the street, young Evie, and she's trying to acquire her first John. She's very ham-fisted with doing this.
Yeah, the way she approaches him, what she says to him is almost like a Monty Python skit. Like the dialogue is like it's so inexpert, and you take pity on her. But it's really interesting, like the society turned upside down in this sort of this sort of 1984 style state. The good guys are villains, the villains are good guys, and it's like, this is like a setup. This is like I want, like, comparing this to like Dark Knight Returns or whatever. This is like a Batman type setup where it's like somebody is about to get like attacked, mugged, whatever, and it's like, okay, it's a prostitute, so technically a criminal, and she approaches this guy, and like, would you like to sleep with me? Like something like that.
For money, I mean.
For money, I mean, yeah. And he reveals himself that, like your come online sucks, and I'm also an undercover cop.
Yeah.
So it's like you have the prostitute and then the cop. And what the cop's going to do now is he's going to like rape and murder her along with his other cop friends.
Calls his friends over. Yeah. Known as fingermen to the governing body.
So so you have this totally upside down where it would be the situation would be like a woman's walking down an alley and then two like criminals attack her and then Batman comes to the rescue, but instead she comes to a cop and then like I'm in trouble now. The cop's going to murder because once you've like stepped in over that line of breaking the law in this sort of toxic state, the
draconian.
Yeah, they can do whatever they want, and it's like
sanctioned.
It's sanctioned vigilantism. Like they can just like they can commit a far worse crime. Like what she's committing, like you almost wouldn't even call it crime because it's so pathetic. It's just like somebody who's that desperate, starving or whatever. Like this is like Les Miserables or something, and then like Batman. Like V comes to the rescue. The guy dressed up like a classic villain comes to the rescue.
Does away with those guys, rescues her, and takes her to a strategic location to watch the fireworks, so to speak. That's pretty much it, right? Like the House of Parliament blows up, and he's the cause of it. But that's not all. There's a light show. There's a bunch of fireworks blow up, and we see the big V in the sky dissolve. That's chapter 1. When chapter 2 comes out, this is where we really see the McGoohan prisoner kind of element, because we're seeing behind the scenes with number 2 and
in his like bubble chair that he sits in.
And the people who run the country at this point, for all intents and purposes, they're called the head. And there's an eyes department, and they're for visual surveillance. There's the ears of the head, and they're the people who tap your phones and keep the ears to the streets, man, to try to like pick up information in an audio way.
Yeah, it's the body of the state, and these are all the appendages of the state.
Yeah. It's not the head because they're on fingers.
The fingerman is one who points out the evil. Get him. They point you out. They finger you.
The nose people, they're like the detectives. They're the people doing like real forensic work.
Yeah, and then the mouth is the press. The sort of state-run press.
And that's the radio department too. That's the voice of fate.
Louis Prothero. And they're sort of the thing that everybody says to everybody is England prevails.
England prevails. Yeah, it's like the salutations, man.
And so V, he's kind of like Freddy Krueger or Jason, and he is kind of like the Joker. Like he's kind of like a superhero version of the Joker. He plays like here, shake my hand, and then the hand comes off, and it's a bomb. It explodes,
And we'll see some Freddy moments here because these government heads. Like I'm actually a little unclear who many of them are besides Louis Prothero. Even though at this moment I'm not sure who he even is.
Yeah.
It's later that I'm like, oh, that's Louis.
That guy,
Now, it's alluded to earlier that, he likes dolls, and now here's the guy who likes dolls, but it is a little bit clunky.
This work is very complicated. It's got a lot of things going on, and I've read this a few times, and it is like, first time I read it, didn't really know what much of anything was, and like each time it gets more, and so it's...
I'm going to rely on you to like... sort of walk me through the thing on with these parts that I'm sort of screwed up on.
Well, even like just us talking about it, like these other books that we've reviewed, like kind of have like a good recollection of the sequence of events. This one's really hard. Like it's kind of like I want to talk about stuff that happens a bunch of chapters in the future. I want to because it just like you're learning about things in this like very like interesting way that's not like A B C. There's kind of this like photograph slowly emerging in it. It's a very different work. It's
an early work. The way that you grow is by kind of punching above your weight class, breaking down that muscle tissue, man, to build it back up. And he's trying some things that I think are largely successful, but there's kludginess. I could put some of that onus on the art, though. in the Neil Gaiman masterclasses, he was talking about like when you're creating characters, have the funny hat kind of system when you put together new characters. Not saying that you have to put a funny hat on a character, but just give them something distinguishing that we know that this character has that. And when these government guys get on that train, I have no connection with them. I just know that they have some weight because they can like tell people this train car is full. Don't come on this thing, man. And they listen. But when they're on this train and it goes off, somebody spots what might have been rags or something hanging out like on a trestle above the train as they were going into a tunnel. Turns out it was V.
Yeah, and he's a little bit like a scarecrow. So that idea of like just there's rags up there is kind of cool. You know?
David Lloyd sells it when you see him up there. Like you could imagine that it's like a croaker sack that got caught on a damn stick or some shit. Like a Freddy or a Jason, you see the thing first, then something bad happens. The lights go out.
Yeah.
And then enter Michael Myers. That's exactly what happens here. We don't know the extent of what V is capable of. So there's a guy who just kind of like is frozen in time. Like he's just dead. How does that happen? Is that something we might discover later on? Like how he can accomplish these kinds of things?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of like, I don't know, Deus Ex Machina or whatever. He's just the great, like V's just the greatest. Like anything you could think of, he's already thought of and done and set up ahead of time. And he doesn't seem to have any kind of like superpowers like a Superman or can fly. But in every other sense, he's like untouchable and can like has planned every moment in exquisite detail.
There are like 3 or 4 guys in there in that train car.
Yeah, high up people in the government, important government. He kills all of them except for Prothero. He kidnaps and takes him back to his lair.
And we'll discover what happens there in chapter 3. Chapter 3 is the expositional chapter where we kind of figure out how the world got to be this way. We get another little piece with the leader who is just trying to explain the gravity of what's happened in the past 2 days. Plethora has been kidnapped. The voice of fate. Now we can predict the weather and all that so accurately that we have 2 days worth of audio ready to go, hour on the hour, man, for broadcast. But we're running low. We're running out of that stuff. So it's paramount that we get this guy so that we don't upset the order of this world by bombing the House of Parliament. That's like, their propaganda idol that a lot of people sort of like, the leaders like feel like people like believe in that as a symbol, like it's the Statue of Liberty.
Yeah.
The fireworks, which is verboten, the big V and all that, like that's another thing. The leader sees that this world is potentially going to be very upset in very short order. And there are like, there's a detective story that's woven in here.
Yeah, which like, I mean, the movie, like that was kind of like a central thing in the movie.
Yeah, I've never seen it. When we see V and what's called, like there's the detective thing that's going on, all that. And then we see, caption, the shadow gallery. And V, like, enters. He comes back into the spot. And you see, like, as he walks in, there is a body. There is arms and legs inside of some clothes. It's a body, but it's not explored yet. And for me, I'm like, well, what is that?
Yeah.
It pays off at the end, man. But not before V meets up with Evie in the shadow gallery. She's there, and she has a lot of like tchotchkes that she could play with because he's a maven of pop culture, and he's been saving that stuff, man. So then we get the expositional flashback sequence.
Yeah, this is his bat cave, with his collection of tchotchkes. This is kind of like Fahrenheit 451, where the state wants you to forget history, forget anything that ever happened in the past, so that they can tell you their version of history. And so he's collecting all the thrown out things like the pop culture and ephemera and books and stuff. He's the one guy who remembers and wants to make sure he remembers. And he says how like he's gonna remind them of melodrama. He's gonna remind them what the meaning is of like theater. He helps her like take off her makeup that she put on. He's like explaining. He's like, they made you a victim. They see you as a statistic, but you're more than that. And you're going to show them,
And she says those bits like she has her own like insecurities and my name's Evie, I'm nobody special, and he's like, everybody has a story to tell. You are the hero, you are the villain, you are, the asshole. You're all of these things in your story. That's something that you Twitter people could remind yourself of whenever you're blasting on people.
And like the V, of course, like the V keeps showing up everywhere, and then her name Evie, like so, like V, you're gonna get you're getting the Alan Moore treatment. He's gonna hit you with his his metaphor or whatever, like his motif as many times as possible.
Let's go into the flashback sequence and figure out how the world got this way. Kind of like a World War III.
Yeah, World War III, and he Alan Moore's he's transposing the rise of fascism in Germany. He's transposing that into what was modern England. The set of circumstances that creates the power vacuum that allows something like that to happen is nuclear war, nuclear fallout, and it's kind of Europe doesn't exist anymore. There's only England, which kind of made me think of Brexit, or it's kind of like the metaphorical version of that is happening now. And Moore's kind of exploring what if what happened in Germany wasn't a specifically German thing, but could happen anywhere. Could happen in my home.
It comes to fruition, and the dust settles because the gay people have disappeared in this world. They've been taken someplace, and we don't know where they are. The people of color are gone.
Yeah, there's concentration camps are created, and they're called resettlement camps or whatever. And they're just making people are being disappeared, and it comes out of fear. Everybody's scared. There's for a long time before the rise of this fascist government is just
riots.
Chaos, absolute chaos, roving gangs, food riots, just people killing each other over food. And she's talking about it's happening in the 80s. She's telling you about her childhood in the 80s, what happened with her dad, and then her mom just disappeared one day, and it was just her and her dad, and they're fighting the gangs, and then her dad died. Or
he was a socialist years ago.
In college.
It's like the fascists and the corporations that kind of pick up the pieces, and create the world that we live in here, and institute their kind of draconian order upon the people who are left.
Yeah, and at least in the beginning, some semblance of order was welcome, to the general public, the people who aren't involved in any kind of ideology.
And this chapter ends with Louis Prethera wakes up, and he is in a uniform inside of it's almost like a set of one of the early resettlement camps. And this is an interesting ending for this chapter, because up to this point, when you hear about Louis and you see him in motion, he collects dolls. And
they use that as a way of saying he's kind of questionable. Within the government, he's anybody in sort of show business is suspect, by the government, but they kind of they're what else are you going to do? You got to have showbiz people. You got to have somebody to read the news. You got to have somebody to write the story,
And he's so good at his job that people sometimes think that fate has a human voice, and that he is that.
Yeah, it makes me think of Raymond Burr or something. He has it's just this voice that you hear it, and it's this is the voice of God, or this is the voice of authority, and he's so tied to the brand of what the government presents as their message. His voice is such an important part of it, and that
you know what that's like, dude?
Yeah.
Howard and Nestor, man.
Right? Yeah. Howard Phillips. Yeah.
From Nintendo Power. That guy got too much power.
Well, that's the thing. They'll never let that happen again in this world of make themselves dependent on a human being. They'll come up with some digitized version of this guy or whatever. But yeah, because fate is the computer that predicts all this stuff, and they talk about how the Joe on the street thinks that voice that they hear is the voice of the computer. It is the voice of fate. And so to find out that it's actually an actor would be kind of disastrous when he's replaced with, like Kermit the Frog, or something getting replaced with a different voice.
Should we segue into chapter 4?
Yeah.
This is the karmic retribution chapter for the voice of fate, Louis Prethera. Kind of like a Clockwork Orange kind of walk through memory lane, so to speak, man, where V is taking him through this reenactment, this set of the old kind of concentration camp. Louis gives the old story we've all heard. I was just kind of following orders, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And this reenactment of a camp is populated by his doll collection.
He really cares about these dolls. V makes the V makes the mention of like, God, that's interesting. Like, you don't care about flesh and blood. You don't care about people with beating hearts. I mean, you care about these little porcelain and plastic tchotchkes. What we're doing in this chapter is getting slight glimpses into V's past.
Yeah.
We're getting some hint into who this character is, because up to this point we got nothing.
It's just a mask, you know.
Totally. And right now he is an even different mask. This is something I don't think is played upon in all the volumes. Like I know him as the guy. Everybody knows him as the guy Fawkes. But this one is like the Jigsaw mask from Saw.
Yeah, it's this chapter is called Vaudeville. He's dressed up in like a Punch and Judy mask, and it's like his comedic persona. Like that was his villain persona. This is his comedic persona. He's like, "Good morning, campers." So he's leading this guy through sort of like the prisoner or something, some kind of like that reenactment. And there's a series of doors with Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 4, and then Roman numeral 5, the V.
And Lewis like knows that he's a guy from that V was in room V.
Yeah, he like, I think when he gets to that V door, he realizes like the reason why this guy knows all this stuff about me and isn't buying any of my bullshit about just following orders is because he knows me. He was the prisoner in V, and I remember what I did to that prisoner in V.
And V said that wing is colloquially called the funny farm. So that's where the people with mental issues were at. So we know that's what we're dealing with V, man. He's not quite stable. But who decides who's stable or not?
And V remembered his voice. So you could like it's a really good touch, because you could imagine like when the voice of fate comes on, and then he's like, I know that guy. That's the guy that was like, you know, the butcher of the camp that I was, you know.
There's the ovens.
Yeah, they say
full of dolls.
you worked the ovens.
Okay, yeah.
That was the guy's crime. Like,
right.
That was what he did. He worked the ovens. Like,
and the ovens in this scenario are full of his Franklin Mint Disney dolls. And
his American Girl collection.
And they go up in cinders. And then we see Lewis gets delivered to outside of the police station or something. Is it back to the radio studio?
Yeah, because there's that guy, like there's the guy who keeps saying like bitter almond and bitter like that obviously means something to Alan Moore, and maybe like if you're like I've only like the phrase bitter, I've only heard that from like a Genesis song, like a Peter Gabriel era, you know, the smell of peach blossom and bitter almond. Like I have no idea what it means, but it obviously is, because he repeats it enough times that it must mean something. But yeah, the guy's last name is like Almond or whatever. He keeps calling him bitter almond. And so he shows up there in the radio studio, and it's like a Tales from the Crypt ending, because it's like, here's Prothero, the voice of fate, this like great like booming commanding voice, this like, you know, Shakespearean maybe kind of voice, and he's painted like a doll, and he's just saying mama.
Yeah, he got his desserts, man. The heads of state, they are forced into going into plan B and having somebody else voice fate for that night's broadcasts. And this guy stutters far more than I do on the broadcast, and you can see glimmers. This is actually a good piece of David Lloyd art, because you could see glimmers in the faces of these characters of just like domestic citizens.
People around the kitchen table or whatever.
They're not buying it. They're very uneasy. Like, who is this? This is somebody else. They're not buying what the state is selling, and this is the chink in the armor.
Yeah,
perhaps.
This is like possibly the beginning of the end of this state.
A great ending to a first issue. It makes me very curious to jump into issue 2.
Yeah, and I think like one of the last panels is, you know, this upshot of V, like, you know, jumping, you know, like basically a roof jumper, like totally. Reminding you this is like a superhero story. It's really interesting to me reading this so close to when we read Dark Knight, because like those two works, like they really do speak to each other in interesting ways that I hadn't been aware of. And like Dark Knight Returns is so political, and then this is so political, but it's almost like opposite politics. Dark Knight Returns is like the right wing version of the superhero thing, and then this is like the left wing, you know, version of the superhero, and it's just really interesting, and it's why it's like harder to describe than some of these other comics, but like the politics that Moore is working with here like are so like he has such an understanding of them, and they're very complicated, and they're very nuanced, and they're very like true to life, where Miller's is almost kind of this fantasy land. And so it's like easier to get sort of caught up in it, because the story of it is like simpler. But this, like, it feels like there's meat to this, and that Moore really has something to say. And that and just when you contrast those two creators, Alan Moore and Frank Miller, that like Frank Miller seems like he shoots from the hip, like he writes from the gut, and so his stuff can be very like grab you by the lapels and like and exciting, but there's maybe not a lot of intention to it. That sometimes the story just goes where the story's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
That maybe if he had really thought about it, he might not have wanted the story to go where it goes. Where more, it's like he's got like a very clear idea of what, like he has things he wants to say, and he's working really hard to say them. And they're not simple slogans. They are complicated ideas.
He's an extremely well-read guy. You always hear Miller talking about his like noir fiction, his Dashiell Hammetts and his Mickey Spillanes, but Moore is just ravenous when it comes to material that he ingests. He comes from a deep literary tradition of British writers, so like there's all this extra baggage and stuff that he's bringing along with his process. There's more tools at his disposal than the visceral, intuitive methods that I think are on display with a Frank Miller.
Moore, when we were talking about The Killing Joke, and Moore was unsatisfied with it because it was just like a rip-roaring yarn, and it didn't give you something that you could take with you in your real life and use and help. Like we're seeing that like it is important to him. Like he's not just like a showman or whatever. It's important to him that he communicate some kind of important idea that he has that can be of some use to you. Dark Knight Returns, like all this being said, Dark Knight Returns I've read like a million times. This like you could count on, like I don't think I've read this 5 times in my life. So it's like,
and I never made it through once yet.
Yeah, there's something about like just like the visceral quality of what Miller does. Like when you are like just shooting from the hip, and the fact that it's more or less one guy doing it. Art. So it's like there's limits to your ambition when you're working in something where you're entirely dependent on an artistic collaborator. So it's just really like, and I think as we work our way through this work, I think we're going to see it, like we're going to see ways that it plays off of, how just ways that Dark Knight, our understanding of Dark Knight, kind of pushes against it, or it's like I think it's going to be an interesting journey.
I think so too, man, and I'm looking forward to it. But you and I have to go back to work, man. So Kayfabers, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel. Hit the bell icon, and it'll notify you whenever we have new videos available. You could support us by buying our comics. There are links below for that. You could also support the Spread Shop. Those links are in the description below. Tom, drop a plug.
You can follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli, or on Instagram at Tom_Scioli.
All those links are available in the description below this video. Tom and I are going to get back to work, man. We got to like expand upon our own personal bibliographies, but you Kayfabers know what your marching orders are.
Read more comics.
MOORE.